The Liberal government says no, it won't back down from its controversial change to the summer jobs program. But today, it did attempt to clarify what the new clause means and why it was added. The application requires employers to say they respect reproductive and sexual rights. But according to the government, that change is not meant to target faith-based groups. So, who is it meant to target? And what does the government say to critics who call this an attack on freedom of expression and religion? Joining me now from Toronto is the Minister of Labour, Patty Hajdu. I'm glad you were able to join us, Minister. I want to ask you about this controversy over the summer jobs program, of course. There's been outcry, as you know, by faith groups across the country. There's been a court challenge against your government. There's been international attention for this. Why not just make an adjustment, change the wording a little, satisfy your critics, instead of digging in?
Well, first of all, let me just tell you that the Canada Summer Jobs Program is one of the key components of the Canada Youth Employment Strategy. And the main goal of the program is to provide that quality job experience for young people across this country that allows them to move forward in their careers and get those good middle-class jobs that we talk about. It's a foundational piece of their, their resume building. And so with that principle, I mean, we provide grants to thousands and upon thousands of organizations across the country to do that, to employ young people and give them that quality first job, in many cases that will set them on their path to their careers. When we provided those grants last year, we heard a number of groups and Canadians that came forward and said, you know, there are groups that are getting these grants that are asking students to do things that actually work to undermine the rights of Canadians. Groups like the Centre for Bioethical Freedom Reform, these kinds of groups that are promoting material or distributing material that is anti-choice, that is about actually shaming women who have had abortions or, trying to limit women's reproductive choice. Groups that had used the money to facilitate, camps that were not welcoming to GLBTQ community members or wouldn't hire members of the GLBTQ community. And so when we heard those complaints, we took them seriously. We took a look at some of those concerns and some of those groups, and we agreed. And so moving forward, we are asking groups to attest that the core mandate or their primary activities as a group and the job description will not work to undermine the rights of Canadians.
All right, I understand the point you make, but I want to ask you this. If the government is so determined not to subsidize, in effect, people who were promoting values that you see as counter to the Charter, even counter to the law, then why not ban such activities as opposed to asking people to deny their beliefs? I'm making a distinction between activities, handing out leaflets, as you just described, which you find offensive and contrary to the Charter. Why not ban those activities and put in language that would ban those activities rather than, in effect, banning such beliefs?
And that's exactly why we've asked people to specify that their core mandate, which is not beliefs, which is not values, it is the purpose of their organization, their primary activities, don't work to actively undermine the rights of Canadians. And
well,
so,
what's a primary activity? What if they consider it a core belief, but it's not their primary activity?
Look, organizations are comprised of many different beliefs, and sometimes members of organizations hold differing beliefs. And that's not what we're getting at here. We're getting at what the primary purpose of that organization is. And so if you look at many faith-based organizations, which, by the way, provide fantastic services across this country, oftentimes they might be to administer to the poor or to feed the hungry or to provide spiritual comfort to, members or to recruit new members to their faith even. These are primary activities. They may have a variety of different beliefs, and we are so fortunate to live in a country that actually values and respects those beliefs. This is a grant program whose primary purpose is to provide good jobs for kids that are going to move forward in their careers and use those experiences as stepping stones to future employment. And so our perspective is that those funds, those government funds, should not be used in a way that's actively working to undermine Canadians' hard-won rights.
So if it's restricted to your core mandate, as you say, could you give me an example of a group that is anti-abortion that would still get the funding?
Well, there may be faith groups, for example, that believe in the sanctity of life, but their core actions are, running a summer camp or, providing a soup kitchen in their community or supporting people with accessing affordable housing. All those kinds of core mandates are, of course, their primary activities. And so as a former not-for-profit organization director, I worked I ran a large homeless shelter. I worked in partnership with many of these groups that had differing beliefs, but their core principal mandate and meaning their activities was about something that had to do with, providing.
Now you just said their core mandate meaning their activities.
Right.
So we're not talking about beliefs now. Because,
No, we never were
the
talking about
attestation
beliefs.
that you ask people to tick that box appears to address beliefs.
Well, it's completely untrue. And in fact, it's been misconstrued, I think, by a number of people who have been misunderstanding what a core mandate is. A core mandate simply states what the purpose of the organization is, what their core activities are. And each not-for-profit organization, whether it's a church or a homeless shelter or a sports club, will have a core mandate. And it specifically speaks to what their core activities are. What is the purpose for that organization? It is different than what their beliefs and values are.
All right. Now, from the start, finally, it's my understanding that the government has been saying that we don't want people promoting values that are contrary to the Charter. But the Charter of Rights and Freedoms actually doesn't indicate any constitutional right to abortion, does it?
Well,
isn't that a problem?
Not in our perspective. Our perspective is these are rights that have been won through Supreme Court decisions that women have a right to control their own bodies. We have, in this country affirmed the fact that women have a right to reproductive choices that may include abortion. And so when we have an organization like the Center for Bioethical Reform that is actively seeking to undermine those rights, to in fact use shame as a way to undermine those rights and use government money to hire young students to do that work, that's where we run into a problem.
I want to thank you. The Minister of Labour, Patty Hajdu. Thanks for doing this. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Terry.
Thank you.